I know we've already eaten, but I'm going to ask my pastor, Pastor Ricky Stevens of St. Mary's Missionary Baptist Church Parish, to come up and do a prayer for us, please. Please give him a round of applause as he comes forward. Would you please stand? Come on up.
Thank you. Thank you, Xavier. Let us bow. Eternal God, our Father, we come now thanking you again for your grace and your mercy. Thank you, Lord God, for just another day's journey. We thank you, Lord God, for this gathering that you have assembled here, and we pray, Lord God, that its purpose will be achieved through the things that will be done here today. Lord God, we thank you for the food that you provided for us. We thank you now, God, for all those that are here, and we just ask you now that you would bless each and every person that is assembled here. Continue, Lord God, to look over us, and continue, Lord God, to be our God. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Please remain standing. The Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. If you are a candidate for office, would you please stand? A candidate for office, would you please stand? Hey, Will. Will's running again for office. We're going to start right here with Mr. Tatum. Go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know what you're running for.
Sure, my name is Richard Tatum. I'm currently retired from the United States Air Force. I'm currently a school board member. I'm running for House District 72. Thank you.
Thank you. Please give him a round of applause. Ms. Shoemaker?
Diana Shoemaker, I'm running for County Commission District 3.
Thank you so much. Please give her a round of applause. Mr. Green?
Keith Green, candidate for County Commission District 1.
Thank you. Please give him a round of applause. Mrs. Gay?
Alyssa Gay, candidate for House District 72.
Thank you so much. Please give her a round of applause. Did I miss anyone? Thank you so much for standing up. It is not easy to run for office, but we thank you for putting yourself out there, and good luck to you all. I am Xavier Bailey. I am the president of the Manatee Tiger Bay Club. I will be your moderator today. First, before we begin, I would like to recognize all veterans. If you're a veteran, would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you so much for your service. Now, please silence your cell phones. No music. We appreciate it so much. Today, we're going to have our legislative update, and we will be able to ask questions. If you see there's a microphone there, so as they do their introductions, there'll be 5 to 6 minutes. I usually don't cut them off, but just in case, I'll stand up if you're going a little too long. First, we'll have Senator Jim Boyd. It's District 20. Then we'll have Representative Tommy Gregory, Florida House of Representatives, District 72. And Representative Will Robinson, Florida House of Representatives, District 71. Please give Senator Jim Boyd a round of applause as he comes forth.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, Xavier. I finally made it. You've asked me about a dozen times, and it seems like I'm always here or there, but I do appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. And before we get started, also I want to thank Tiger Bay for the very nice award that I received in absence several months ago. We were in session, but the Pat Glass Leadership Award, the Presidential Leadership Award, that means a lot to me coming from such an impressive group, and I'm very grateful. I know Amanda, who's here, Amanda and Kathy from office are here. Amanda, excuse me, accepted it on my behalf, and I'm very glad that she was able to, but sorry I wasn't able to be here, but very, very thankful for the award and have it prominently displayed in my office right now. So thank you very much for that. I assume you want me to just give a little bit of overview from the Senate side, and then we'll let my colleagues do the same, and then we'll talk about what's important. So some of what we say will be redundant, and that's the nice thing about being able to go first. I can say things that others may or may not want to say and get that over with. But usually they're more eloquent and a little more succinct than I am. So we'll play it by ear. But overall, I just think from the Senate's perspective, I believe my House colleagues would agree that we had a pretty good session. It was pretty smooth, somewhat uneventful, not a lot of controversy, not a lot of interaction that was negative between all the parties involved. And as everyone knows, we have in this process, it takes three to tango. You know, we have to have the House and the Senate in agreement, and then the governor has to agree with what we do as well. So overall, I think everybody's objectives were somewhat accomplished. I know as he's insisted, we call him now Mr. President. Representative Gregory will probably speak of this as he did before, but there was a little bit of fun between the House and the Senate and the governor on one primary bill, and I'll let him speak to that, but ended up all good. Overall, we had about 2,000 bills were filed, which is a little lower than normal. My time in the legislature, average has been about 3,000 bills seem to be filed every year, which is about 2,900 too many in my opinion, but nonetheless, that's the way it goes. And we had about 250-ish, I don't remember the exact number, get across the finish line, meaning the House and the Senate both agreed and got to the governor. And some of those bills have been signed and some of them are still waiting, as is the budget. And the budget this year was about $117 billion of money that was allocated in the budgetary process. About 500 million, I believe it was, in pay down in debt as part of that budget, and about 10 billion went to reserves, which is really, I think, impressive. Thank you. The state of Florida, as you know, is fiscally very sound across the nation, probably, if not the best. We're in contention for the best, and it just takes good, responsible leadership and then good governance on our parts to make sure that we leave Florida very sound. And over our time in the legislature, all of us, you know, that number has increased every year, and our financial standing has improved every year along the way, which is very good. We're waiting to see what the budget, what the governor likes and doesn't like in the budget. As you know, there's the veto process, so he can by line decide this is good or this is bad. So we're all kind of optimistic, and we're all being very nice now, you know, sending him cards and letters and congratulations and this and that. So he'll look favorably on our request. But I'm happy to stand here and report, along with my colleagues. We've, at least on my budget, which included a lot of Representative Gregory and Representative Robinson's efforts on the House side, about $68 million of monies coming back to our community, providing the governor agrees with that and signs it, which I think is very good. And that's a lot of things, from county and city needs to some of the other needs, Moat Marine and others like that, that will hopefully be funded with your dollars, and that's a good thing. Part of our budget process is also trying to figure out how much money we can give back to taxpayers, which I think is a very cool thing to do and a very good thing to do. I was Ways and Means Chairman when I was in the House, and that was our primary focus, was to come up with a tax credit or tax refund package that went to taxpayers. And over the years, that's increased. This year, it's a little over $1 billion of tax relief that we'll be giving back to our friends and neighbors and you all at home, which I think is very good to do and very, very responsible. One of the things, and I'll wrap up here in just a second, but one of the things that was important to the Senate and the House was right in lockstep with us was the Live Healthy initiative. Last year, you recall, the Senate President's main initiative was Live Local, which had a lot of components, but not the least of which was more affordable and attainable housing, and especially as it relates to workforce. So that's underway. This year, the Live Healthy initiative was passed, and part of that's part of the budget that we're waiting on. But about, I think it was 48 million in, 46 billion in increased healthcare access kind of components. And there's a variety of things that make that up. But that's a very, very strong statement by the legislature in terms of healthcare and what that means to our state and how important it is. So looking forward to that. And I'll mention one bill that I worked on. I worked on a number, as we all did, but one that I'm very happy about and very proud of that we passed, and I trust the governor will like this as well. He signed the components of this bill already, and my part of the Live Healthy was the behavioral health teaching hospital component, which at the outset designates 4 behavioral health teaching hospital locations around the state. Tampa General with University of South Florida, University of Florida in Shands, both in Gainesville and in Jacksonville, and then University of Miami in Miami, of course, with Jackson Memorial. And it's to bolster and increase access to behavioral health care. And as you know, and we all have seen over the years, I think this legislature has done a good job in addressing those needs, but more and more and more, we see the needs of our friends and neighbors in the behavioral health space, and this will allow a lot of access, more training slots for doctors, healthcare professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses that attend to these patients, and then the teaching component that the hospitals have those very strong teaching components as part of their curriculum and part of their focus for the future. By average or by kind of normal standards, if you will, or what we get is about 500,000 to 700,000 Floridians that suffer from behavioral health issues. And I can remember, sadly, a time when if you expressed the need, it was almost a stigma and that was attached to it, and you were kind of looked at differently in society. I'm so thankful and so glad that our society now realizes it's an illness that needs to be treated, and the legislature is taking that very seriously in this component of the bill, so very excited about that. And overall, just a pleasure to serve with my colleagues. I believe we have the best delegation in the state of Florida, and I mean that after looking at a lot of them, and there's a lot of good ones, but we all work very well together. My friends in the House are always there to support what we want to do, and hopefully I'm there to support what they want to do. But together, and there's others in our delegation that aren't here today, we work very well and very community focused on the things that we do. We're sorry to lose our friend Tommy Gregory, but I am more than excited for the position he'll be taking at State College of Florida. And again, Mr. President, it's nice to serve with you and share this time together. So thanks.
What you need. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Octavia. It's a pleasure to be back here today. I have to say it feels like deja vu. I walk into the room and I see my opponent from 2018 here, and I think, oh boy, is it going to be a debate again? So I'm glad that it's not going to be a debate, and I am glad to see you here, Liv. It's a reminder that Tiger Bay is full spectrum, right? Whatever your beliefs are on any particular issue, this is a place where you could come and, of course, listen to things like the legislative wrap-up, but then voice your questions or your concerns in the form of questions, I guess, right, Octavia? It really is a pleasure to see you here, Liv. And I just point out up front, and I probably did this in the past, I hope I have, that, you know, while we didn't agree on some issues, she was a class act. And I remember the following year that she invited me to her university, to her class, to come and speak to one of them. And I think it was on the 3 branches of government and legislation and the legislative process. So I was really appreciative of that. And I think that speaks well of her, of course, but it also speaks well of Tiger Bay. While Senator Boyd was speaking, I agree, we didn't have anything controversial this year. And as he said it, I'm shaking my head yes. I'm like, well, that's right. Then I look around the room and I see some people shaking their head no. And I go, oh, yeah, that's right. We're the supermajority in Tallahassee. So we probably didn't see things controversial that some of you would have. But I agree, Senator, it was a quiet year overall. And I think that's good, right? You don't necessarily need the government to grow. And it reminds me For Representative Robinson and I, when we first entered, and we were getting good mentorship from Senator Boyd and Senator Galvano, and we had a Speaker of the House who gave us a journal, and I just think so fondly as I remember getting that journal, and I was impressed at the time, but after you're in it for a few years, you realize how important it was, because the journal on the inside just had a simple note that said, may you fill the pages of this journal with notes of your accomplishments, but more importantly, notes of your restraint. And I think that's important for a government, regardless of what state or country you represent. I think Florida and your conservative supermajority that's up there right now tries to do that, but you may disagree with us from time to time. I will tell you, you'd be surprised to know what I would tell you we would talk about in terms of judiciary. If I were to hit the top topics, they would be drugs, money, strippers, and pirates. We spent a lot of our time talking about those four things this year, a lot of time talking about drugs, and that's a follow-up to the work that Representative Robinson did last year. You know that here in Bradenton as you drive around, and it's the same across this state. There are smoke shop after smoke shop after smoke shops. And if you don't frequent them, you probably don't realize that they are selling now recreational use drugs to get people high. And they're doing that as derivatives from hemp. And I won't bore you with the science of it. I'll just say that hemp is essentially the same thing as cannabis, which means it's marijuana. It's got the same mind-altering substances in it. So that's been a battle that we've been engaged in for 2 years. Representative Robinson took the first half of it last year. We continued that work this year. And we're hoping that the governor is going to sign that good bill to try to put some guardrails in place. It really is a dangerous situation. We talked a lot about porch pirates. That's the pirates I was referencing, and smash and grab tactics. So that's been a real problem for our business industry. So we took a hard look at that this year to see what we can do to try to fight that. We took a look at money, and money in the form of the billions of dollars that are flowing into the courtrooms around this state and around this country. If you're not aware of it, hedge fund people are very creative, and they're always looking for a way to get a bigger return on their money or someplace to invest. And they have now figured out that they can invest in lawsuits with no risk to them. If they lose, they don't have to pay attorney's fees, but if they win, they could win, one of those giant McDonald's cases or something and hit a home run for their investors. We tried to put some regulations on that, weren't successful, but I'm hoping that the legislature continues to look at that in future years. Beyond that, I'll save the other issues for questions. I'd like Representative Robinson mentioned to me, he'll talk about the social media bill, and that was an area where we spent a lot of our legislative time and energy. There's a good story to tell there, and I'd like him to tell it. Representative Robinson.
Set up for failure now. Oh, I thought these were notes you were reading, Tommy. I know you don't normally read from notes. I'm like, Tommy doesn't normally have a script. Well, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here talking about post-session. I think this is the fifth time I've been here, my 6 sessions. The only time I was not here, I believe Representative Gregory was here by himself. I had spine surgery about a week before and still had some effects of that. So I love coming back to Tiger Bay. Just like with Tommy, I have great memories. I think I was one of the first members of Tiger Bay. Pat Glass started this years ago as a kind of a debate club. And that's really what it is. So it's always a pleasure to hear what your concerns are. I've been speaking around the state, and I normally have a title that says the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I thought about it. I'm like, well, if that means 2/3 of what I'm talking about is bad or ugly. So I'm sure we're going to talk about a number of issues today, but I want to talk about a couple things. And Senator Boyd mentioned it. At one side of the coin, the Florida economy is incredibly strong. Maybe the strongest Florida economy we've had in years, whether it's reserves or our budget. People always ask me all the time, what do you have to do up there in Tallahassee? Well, we only have one constitutional requirement, and that's to pass a balanced budget. And you know why? Because that's in our Florida Constitution. And wouldn't it be great if that was DC's only requirement, just to pass a balanced budget and get out of there? That's all we have to do. And that's really the focus many times of our session. I know a lot of the policy bills gets a lot of the headlines, but the most important thing we do is the budget, because that sets the priority of the state for the next fiscal year. And I believe we have a very strong budget, a fiscally constrained budget that sets forth a lot of the priorities, if not all the priorities that we need over the next upcoming fiscal year. Senator Boyd also mentioned the tax package, a very robust tax package. Representative Gregory and I are actually blessed to be or have the ability to stand on the backs of those legislators like Senator Boyd and Senator Galvano that came before us, because times weren't always like this. We all remember the Great Recession back in 8, 9, and 10, and Jim, you probably remember you had to cut stuff from the budget. And so you don't ever forget those lessons, though, of always being fiscally prudent with your tax money while balancing and making sure you have the most robust budget you can have for that upcoming fiscal year. Representative Gregory mentioned House Bill 1, or the social media bill. That garnered a great deal of attention, and I want to walk you through kind of the inside process of that bill. In the House side, when you number a bill 1, guess what that means? That is the number 1 priority of the Florida Speaker of the House. So that bill was rolled out pretty early in session, and what it did is it basically banned the use of social media for minors under the age of 16. We had a robust debate on the House floor. I think the vote count was something like 110 to 10. It was, in terms of bipartisan product, actually Michelle Rayner, who used to represent this area, was one of the prime co-sponsors and spoke very passionately for the bill. So we passed it off the House floor. The Senate does is what the Senate has to do every time, is they tweak it a little bit. And so because they tweaked it, it came back to the House chambers and passed by a similar margin. And unusually, we recessed that House floor session and went out into the rotunda where the Speaker of the House and the 3 or 4 bill sponsors talked about the bill. And I thought to myself, why are we having a press conference? And it dawned on me, well, we're having a press conference for an audience of 1, and that person is Governor Ron DeSantis. The governor had expressed reservations, mainly on the parental rights aspect, as to whether or not parents should have, as opposed to an outright ban, shouldn't parents have some sort of control over this? Regardless, the bill has passed both chambers and it went to the governor. So the governor had a decision to make. And somewhat historically, he vetoed the bill. He vetoed House Bill 1. And I say that because it really shows the leadership that we are blessed to have in the House and the Senate, because that was an opportunity for session to come off the rails. And I know there may be some disagreement on this, but this was a somewhat quiet session. This issue could have exploded. We may still be up there in Tallahassee if cooler heads hadn't prevailed. And thankfully they did. And it shows the leadership, and frankly, 2 presiding officers, President Pasadomo, Speaker Renner, they're at the very top of their games to make sure that they got what they wanted in this bill, and also the governor got what he wanted in the bill. So we had to do some parliamentary tricks and bill tricks, and we actually, because House Bill 1 no longer exists, we merged everything into House Bill 3, which included some issues on pornography and stuff, somewhat related. And the main piece that changed was there's still the outright ban, but now it's only 14 and under. 15 and 16, parental consent now comes into play. So the governor achieved his goal, and the speaker achieved his goal. And the president, it wasn't necessarily her priority. She had other priorities, which Senator Boyd mentioned. But the bill went to the governor, and thankfully, he signed that bill. So that's an example of the legislative process. And I will note this, the third House vote, because we had to vote House Bill 1 twice, and now House Bill 3 for the first time, that only had 5 no votes on it. So between then and the last vote, I think it was Democrats. We had 5 Democrats that signed onto that bill. So a very bipartisan product that the Speaker is very enthusiastic about. And what's great about the process is I happened to be meeting with some young ladies from Pace Center for Girls from Manatee. Remember this, Christy? And I asked them about it. And they were concerned. And I think they mentioned this issue. They mentioned about parental consent, and what if my mom wants me to, and I'm 15 and 16, and I have a business. So I'm not saying that I took their ideas to the governor, but it's part of the process, and that's why it's so great. I know we love seeing our local folks there. The lobbyists, we could, deal with the lobbyists. We love to see our local folks come up there and express what their issues are. So that is House Bill 1. And I want to talk about one other issue that's been hinted about. Actually, we've said it a couple times. But it is with great loss that the legislature is going to lose Representative Gregory. And our loss in the legislature is State College of Florida's gain. Tommy's not only one of my closest friends, but he's also my roommate. We made a lot of drives together. And what's great about our friendship and relationship is we agree on maybe 98% of things, but there's a 2% there that we don't. And we've had many conversations in our living room about those 2%. And I don't necessarily think I changed your mind, and vice versa. But we had a fun, respectful debate, and I distinctly remember, in terms of landmark pieces of legislation, the tort reform package we did last year has got to be in the top 5 of legislative products that we've passed the past 6 years, and Representative Gregory was a sponsor of that. And we had an impromptu meeting, sat down, and we grilled him with questions to see how he could do. And hopefully it made you better. You knocked it out of the park with that. But we are going to miss you. I'm going to miss you personally. And I know we have some great folks that are thankfully stepping up to serve that important role. But you will be missed by me personally, the legislature. Tommy's one of the top debaters, by the way. And you have different types of debaters. You have bombastic debaters. I think Liv would probably, her blood would boil if you hear these debaters. You have others like Tommy that gets the same message across, but in a more, I would say, respectful way. And we need more people in public office. So if you want to step up and serve, this is a gentleman that you should admire and try to emulate. So we are excited for you at State College of Florida. The university is in great hands from Dr. Prostfeld, and it's only going to get better. I do look forward to you coming up to Tallahassee and seeing you on the other side of the desk in the appropriations process. So that could be fun. But like my 2 colleagues have said, it's just a pleasure to serve you all, and I look forward to your concerns and your questions. God bless.
I've been doing these debates for a while. One of my favorite debates was Liv and Tommy. That was a great debate. You guys are really good at what you do. You all said most of you all are the majority. And so when we look at the people in the room, there are some people that didn't agree with what Florida did this year, and there's some people that also agree heavily. And from you all touched on retirement system, the deregulation of high school stakes testing, insurance. There was a lot of things that you guys were going to battle with in Florida this year. And so we have some people. I'm not going to ask my questions. I'm going to let you can stand up at the middle, and if you do have a question from one of our, the senator or the 2 reps, please go to the microphone. I'm going to read my rules. Please ask your question. Please do not elaborate. Please do not go back and forth. This is for my board members too. I love you. Please do not go back and forth. Let them answer your question. Let's all be respectful. We do not have to agree to be respectful. Go ahead.
My name is Jim Whitman. I'm a Tiger Bay member. This question is for Senator Boyd. You mentioned, this is a kudos, you mentioned givebacks to the taxpayers, and the thing I want to thank you the most for is indexing the homestead tax credit. That made it through it, right? Right, so that's great. You never can tell when inflation is going to rear its ugly head. And that's one of the things that's going to make a difference in that regard. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I do have a question with regard to the bill that you sponsored about mental health training, and that is, having been a psychiatrist working for Manatee Glens and having residents there from our local medical school, it's an osteopathic medical school. There are many people in this world, some professionals, that think that osteopathy is somehow distinguished from medicine. It's not. They they read the same textbooks, take the same exams, go to the same residency programs. So I'm curious why that wasn't on the list of beneficiaries of this program. So I'd be curious to know about that. Thank you.
Is that the question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Whitman, and always good to see you. And just to be clear, the homestead exemption, I think you referred to as a ballot initiative, so it did pass the legislature, and it will go to the voters, so you all will be able to decide that. That's a great question, too, on the distinction between allopathic and osteopathic and the different forms of medicine. I, too, agree that the osteopathic medicine route is just as recognized and just as well thought of as the MD route. A lot of debate back and forth with leadership on that issue. At the end of the day, it just became one that they decided this is the way we're going to go now. The program does allow itself to be opened up for additional consideration, so we will have that opportunity as we move forward. But for now, that's the way it kind of ended up between both bodies and the decision that was seemed to be best for everyone. I did weigh in, not trying to pat myself on the back, but I did weigh in on that issue as it was my bill. It was a president's priority, but it was I carried the bill. But so I have to defer a little bit to leadership on some of those issues since it wasn't exclusively my initiative. But I believe there's opportunity for that. And I will tell you, and you probably recall, over the past several years, even when I was in the House, I was able to secure some funding for residency slots for specifically LECOM and the psychiatric medicine component of that worked with the Manatee Glens or Centerstone or the mental health care facilities around us. So we'll continue to fight for that in the interim, and I don't doubt for a bit that down the road, and probably not too far down the road, it will open itself up and be a little broader. And I don't want to ask a question because it's not my chance to, but I would like to hear before it's all over the 2% of the things that Representative Robinson Gregory debated on at home, because that might be fun to.
Is that a serious question? Actually, I'll answer that question.
Sorry, Steve.
You're fine.
So under Florida law, you are required to pay online sales tax for out-of-state purchases. Florida just wasn't collecting it. Mm-hmm. And as a son of a retailer, I thought that was unfair. Others thought, look, it's extra revenue. We don't need the revenue. But this is an area that Representative Gregory and I disagreed, and I think we landed in a good spot because the extra revenue is actually not growing Florida. It's actually going to pay down, I believe it's our workers' comp trust fund. So that was one area. That's the 1%.
I had retail too, and I thought it was unfair, so I agree. I agree with you. Liv, come up.
Hi, I'm Liv Coleman. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Tampa, and congratulations to Representative Gregory on your new position. It was great. It was great to have you doing the guest lecture at the University of Tampa. Students loved it, so I hope you're able to interact with students in your new capacity in that way too, as president of SCF. There was a point of controversy in the last legislative session. There were a number of them, but one of the biggest ones might have been the rollback of gun safety legislation after Parkland in the last session. So I'm actually interested in anyone who's willing to answer this. Looking forward, Representative Randy Fine has a proposal to allow students to carry guns on campus carry. And so I'd be curious what you all think of that. Thanks.
Can I answer that? No, go ahead.
Excuse me, Representative Gregory, Chairman of the Judiciary, is probably far better equipped to answer extensively than I am. But one thing on the point, Liv, on Representative Fine, he is in the House now, as obviously everyone knows. He's running for the Senate. I read the other day, just as everyone else did, his intention to pursue that legislation. it's got a long way to go, I believe, in terms of the process. He doesn't have any approval from, rules or from leadership that's something that will be taken up. So stay tuned for that one. I've heard from constituents sort of on both sides of the issue, but there are valid concerns as that moves forward. So it's far from being heard in the Senate or the House, but we'll see how that develops.
Great question. I'm sure Dr. Holbrook and I will get called, as well as all the other university and college presidents get called if that bill starts to move through, because they're going to want our opinion at the time. To me, it's related in a weird kind of way to the stripper bill that I mentioned earlier today. It's always interesting when you're in Tallahassee. I'm sure it's the same in D.C. Any particular tough issue, like should you be able to buy a long gun or a handgun at 18, or should you have to wait till you're 21? Should you be able to smoke at 18, or is it 21? What about voting? What about driving a car? All these age of majority debates that we have really at their fundamental core come down to a different principle. It's not about what age people believe. Frankly, you're an adult, whether that's 18 or 21 or 25. It really comes down to the underlying principle. And of course, I'm on the record for many years now being a pretty avid supporter of the Second Amendment, and I don't see any limitation on there from 18 to 21. But the Supreme Court and the law of the land has always ruled under tests that any of the lawyers in the room could talk about, applying strict scrutiny. You got a compelling state interest. In this particular case, you're going to have to weigh that public policy. And then you're going to have a very open and candid discussion about whether or not a college campus, for example, being a gun-free zone, is good policy or bad policy. Does that lead to safer students or less safe students? So I look forward to a very open discussion if Senator Boyd, like Senator Boyd said, if that bill starts to move through the process, that's the debate that you're going to see. But I would really hope that the legislature someday could just say, this is the age you're an adult. Pick an age. Pick an age. Your view on voting, or your view on smoking, or your view on drugs, or your view on strippers, or your view on guns shouldn't be changing what the age majority is. So I'd like to see us engaged in that debate.
And Representative Gregory is correct, and we've kind of talked a little bit about the stripper bill, but the stripper bill basically raised the age from 18 to 21. And it may seem a bit inconsistent that then I voted for reducing the Parkland, the part of the Parkland bill was to only allow those 21 and over to buy a long gun. And for me, it made fine sense. I don't believe the Senate even had a bill that made it through. So none of the Parkland bills that passed off the House floor made it to the finish line. With regard to the college campus issue, I mean, that's an interesting one. And I think Representative Gregory phrased it perfectly. What makes us more safe? And I always lean on expanding someone's Second Amendment rights when that's the question. So I will be very interested to hear exactly what the data is, what the evidence is, what issues are we having on college campuses that necessitate this. Representative Fine obviously has a major issue that he believes Florida needs to deal with. So I'm of the opinion that I want to hear all the sides, but I'm a Second Amendment guy. I believe in your rights as a Second Amendment is put there for a reason, and so I'll always protect that amendment. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jane Filesticker. I'm a Tiger Bay board member, and I have a question for all of you who wish to answer. As we all know, some pretty controversial topics are coming up on our ballot concerning constitutional amendments. One specifically concerning abortion, and another one concerning marijuana, the legalization of marijuana. Thank you. And the polls look as if there's a possibility they may pass. So I'm wondering what you think the legislative response will be if these two amendments do indeed pass.
Well, I've seen other polls than maybe you have. I mean, 60% is our threshold, and that's a tough threshold. And these are two controversial amendments. I'll be voting against both of them. With regard to the abortion amendment, that one almost didn't make the ballot because the court thought it was so unclear. And it's a very extreme amendment. I mean, make no mistake about it. I mean, we can certainly have a fair debate on the 6-week ban, and we did that last year, 2 years ago. But the 15-week ban is actually supported by more Floridians than not. And also, this amendment would not allow parental consent of a minor having an abortion. That has much more favorability than negative. So I think once all those issues come out, that favorability for that amendment will go down. But make no mistake about it, with regard to that one, a lot of the money is going to come in on the pro side, and a lot of this is about money and how it's going to affect a Florida election. But that will be, those amendments are big. I'm glad you asked that question, because we shouldn't just be educated on the candidates that are on the ballot. We have some very significant amendments, and that's one, and obviously the legalization of marijuana. I think that would put us down a path that I wouldn't want Florida to go down. So I'll be voting against that one. And your overall question, what will the legislature do if those pass? Hopefully we don't have to worry about that, at least from my perspective. But we respect the will of the voter, and we have to implement these sometimes. And so I'll just say, if that happens, we'll respect the will of the voter, but we'll have to regulate it, and we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, Jane, I can't add a whole lot that my colleague hasn't said. And I agree with him. I am unapologetically pro-life. I believe what we did in the legislature was the right thing to do. I would like for that to stand. The amendment, as Representative Robinson said, is, in my view, very aggressive toward late-term abortions and other things that personally I don't believe in, and a lot of the folks that I represent don't believe in as well. So I, too, will be voting against that amendment when it's on the ballot. With respect to the marijuana initiative, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor, Dr. Whitman. So, but I'm a layman that's read a lot about it, listened to a lot of people about it, and the studies are just simply convincing to me that access to marijuana, especially at early ages, really does harm for development and growth as young people especially grow into adulthood. I've seen other states that have done that. The results have not been great. I'll just use Denver as one example. My wife's niece and her husband live downtown Denver. They rehabbed a cool home and enjoyed it. And they said downtown now is just a shell of what it used to be because of the initiatives that have been put in place out there with respect to marijuana. So that's just one example of, I think, how it has a really strong possibility of eroding the fabric of who we are as Floridians. That's the cultural fabric, but the medical and the developmental aspect, I think, is far more compelling, that we take this thing very seriously and think long and hard before we implement that in Florida. I think if it does happen, it changes the complexion of Florida, perhaps forever, and we ought to think long and hard about that before we do it.
I agree with both my colleagues. The only thing I'll add is, and I said this last week in Sarasota, Tiger Bay, I bet many of you in the room here have a friend, right? Have a friend, somebody you knew that tried marijuana at one time, maybe several decades ago. I just want to point out that the marijuana of today is not the marijuana from the 1970s and 1980s. It's multiple tens stronger, right? It's a much more dangerous drug than it was in the 1970s. And we had last year, by the way, we're not even to marijuana, but there is hemp being used now to get people high. Last year, there were more than 2,000 phone calls to the poison control in the state of Florida alone. And we've had several hundred deaths over the last several years in Florida just from people essentially overdosing on hemp. And hemp is really, really minor. I mean, that's Coca-Cola compared to the marijuana, the strength that it is today. So I'm very much opposed to that ballot amendment passing. I agree with Representative Robinson and Senator Boyd. If they pass, then we're going to, not me, but my colleagues here will implement that as a law of the land. But I think it speaks to a bigger problem, and that is this provision in the Florida Constitution, which, by the way, I think, what are we on the 4th or 5th iteration of Florida's Constitution? This one's been amended more than 200 times, and it's frankly, that process is being abused. If you follow the money, and you can follow the money normally on ballot amendments, and I'll just speak to the marijuana one for a moment, but some of the marijuana companies that are behind that are putting in $30 or $40 million to get Floridians to vote for that. So you know what their profit is going to be, and they're not concerned with those long-term health impacts or crime impacts and what it does to a family or an individual. So I hope that you all spread the word that this is not the marijuana from the 1970s, and even if it was, we are opposed to this ballot amendment.
Can I just add one thing that I thank you, Octavia, that Representative Gregory kind of made me think about. Earlier in the week, I got a call and then an email with a flyer from our good friend and my colleague, Senator Rusan, who represents the Pinellas and western part of Hillsborough County. Also I think, 27-year recovering addict. So it's very near and dear to his heart. And to Representative Gregory's point about some of the marijuana companies putting in millions and millions of dollars of money to try to persuade voters that this is a good thing. One of those companies, Senator Rusan sent me the information, is there are these Kratom cafes, and it kind of ties in with hemp and some of the other things. A couple, and even in our community, are offering to and hosting alcoholics and the drug users anonymous groups in their facilities. One of these marijuana companies, which I think is predatory at the very least, one of these companies that Representative Gregory alluded to also has a flyer, and I've got a copy of it, that says they will deliver medical marijuana to your Alcoholics Anonymous or drug, I forget the exact name, but the Drug Users Anonymous groups. So when you come out, you can pick up your supply. I hope we'll deal with that in the legislature next year, because that's the first time I've heard that. But Senator Rusan is passionate about it, and he's very, very aggressively interested in some solutions there. So that's just one example of where this goes, perhaps, if Florida turns and heads toward legalizing marijuana. And I don't want to sound like some old guy that thinks, marijuana is the devil child. I believe it is, because of what Representative Gregory said. It's a lot different than when we were growing up, and the changes and the strengths that have been noticed over the years have dramatic effect on lives. So probably enough said, but.
Kevin, before you ask your question, so I have 4 more questions. The last question is Nancy, so we have 4 more questions. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin Wright, Tiger Bay, Manatee. This question is for any one of the 3 that wants to field it. This past week, the Manatee Board of County Commissioners was prepared to present a resolution for what they thought was going to be a majority vote, and which they thought at that time was going to be in accordance with state law, in order to increase and be the first county, I believe, in the state to meet the criteria to raise it from 5 to 6% for the bed tax, sometimes tourist tax, but the bed tax. But the Overwatch folks up in Tallahassee said, hold it, before it was even presented, and said, wait a minute. We passed a law, there's a law from 2023 last year that says, no, you cannot do that, that this must instead be a referendum and go before the voters on the ballot, like the 6 measures that we'll have to vote on in November to do that. In the meanwhile, we've got 2 or 3 surrounding counties,
Kevin.
because they...
What's your question?
I'll get to it right away. We got 2 or 3 other counties that are voting by majority vote to do essentially the same thing. The question is, what are your thoughts about this, about the fact that the 2023 will have to do that, as far as some people have some angst about the overreach of state over local government, and just the idea about the bed tax and 5% as it is?
Well, I would say, Kevin, thank God the state has stepped in. I didn't quite understand all your question, but if you're going to raise taxes, there has to be significant guardrails. Mm-hmm. And what's the justification for the increase in the tax? I mean, I can't ever imagine raising a tax, and I mean, I'm sure the folks have a reason for it, but we do this a lot in Tallahassee. If you want to do something, if you want to raise someone's taxes, you should make it, I think, as hard as possible, because why don't you try a different approach? Now, that tax obviously goes to some great things, but I haven't heard a justification for an increase, so I would not support that, and I would keep Florida policy where it is right now.
That was a good answer.
Hi, Randy Sathan. I'm a member of Manatee Tiger Bay. My question is for all of you. If the Florida economy and the state budget are so strong, why do we not have Medicaid expansion?
I think that would be bad policy. I think that assumes that the state or the feds would continue to fund that expansion, which I don't know if that would be a good assumption. I think we need to look at other ways to get folks on private insurance as opposed to expanding the government or this government program. So I would not be in favor of that expansion.
I would agree with my colleague and only add that we have in this budget and past budgets done a lot of funding in specific areas of healthcare that need attention. I'm not saying there's not areas that don't need attention, but as state revenues increase, as you mentioned, I think we've been pretty careful in trying to assign some of those increases in revenue to some areas of medical care that have lacked perhaps the appropriate attention in the past. But I too agree that should we accept full-on Medicaid expansion, that puts Florida in a very, very precarious spot for the future in terms of our obligation should that funding go away. And at one day from the feds, it certainly would go away. So that's something as taxpayers I think we need to be very careful of.
I'll just add briefly, we did, I don't remember if it was 2 years ago, I think, Representative Robinson may recall, 2 years ago, we took a look at a narrow, what I would call an extension that made sense. We said, okay, well, post-maternal needs, right? You could, if you fell into that category to qualify, you could still only get 2 months worth of care post-birth. And we extended that to 1 year after talking to mental health professionals and listening to experts. But we haven't received expert testimony for any more targeted extensions or application other than the data right now that we've seen, at least in my 6 years there, pointed to frankly, working age, able-bodied for the most part. Now, targeted changes, I think, would make sense, but they've got to be very specific.
Good afternoon. I'm Leanne Chung, active in the construction industry as a licensed. I'm not. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, she can ask. She can ask. She's a member of
I
Sarasota
apologize.
Tiger Bay.
It's about
You're fine.
state legislation,
You're
and I
fine.
apologize. I'm a member of the Sarasota Tiger
You're
Bay,
fine.
and this is my first time. I apologize.
You're
I'm
fine.
not a member. Active as a professional engineer and also licensed general contractor. The state legislators passed a bill allowing subcontractors to become licensed in 13 categories, from marine seawall to solar installation. I've been vetted and selected recently by professional testing to help the state develop testing in structural steel, erection, and precast concrete. How did this legislation come about, and do you foresee more licensing categories in the future? And thank you for the legislation.
I'll say briefly, it wasn't my legislation, so I'm not intimately familiar with it, but I think the thought process, at least in the Senate side and probably in the House as well, in order to expand kind of the workforce and folks that are able to get out and provide, to do the jobs that are increasingly necessary. And as our friend Adam Putnam used to say, it's great to see the state bird back, the construction crane. So there's a lot of that going on, and there's areas of practice in the construction fields that probably had less folks than needed for those jobs. So carefully and judiciously, I think we addressed it in those areas. Certainly in the future we will, but I don't think that's like the gates are open, anybody and everybody can do what they want, because there's standards that need to be adhered to and regulations that need to be applied and for safety and lots of other reasons. So I think that's kind of the thought process by it, as I recall, or behind it, as I recall. I just wasn't intimately involved in it.
I wasn't involved in that specific bill, but it goes to what we've been trying to do in the legislature for many years is the need for a license. Is that for a safety reason, or is that for just a government take for money? And we spent a lot of time, because a lot of these great professions, you don't really need a formal license. It's just a money grab. Some you do. I think one example, and I had all these interior decorators that hated me for a little bit. We had interior decorators that came in because we were doing something with their licensing program. I think if it goes to public safety and it's necessary for that, we obviously need that. But I think we've been looking at a wholesale approach. Does every single occupation in Florida need to have a state license and a local license and all? It's just an impediment to work. In my view, it's a money grab. So we'll continue to look at issues like that.
Nancy.
Hi, Nancy Sanders, Tiger Bay Board Member. This is for all three of you. Future President Gregory, as a college response and for legislators for a legislative response, given what we're seeing on so many college, universities, and campuses today, what do you intend to do to balance First Amendment rights with legal fighting words, and how will you keep the students of Florida safe?
Good question, Nancy.
That's a great question, and I think the safety on campuses, of course, is much like safety in the community. It only works with the rule of law, right? If you don't respect the rule of law, then you're not going to have safety on campuses. There's a big difference between freedom of speech and people that are inciting violence or advocating for genocide, for example. So I think we've got great examples across the state of Florida, starting with President Sass and his response at the University of Florida when this first started to become an issue a couple of months ago. And I'm proud of the work of the presidents, one of whom is in this room, and the presidents across Manatee and Sarasota County, that we haven't had those issues. And I think that that's because you've got good leaders in those positions, making sure that the campus remains a respectful place for all students.
And I, too, think that was a great question. And just a little bit of follow-up to my colleague's response. Listening the other night on the news, Robert Kraft, who owns the New England Patriots, and I should know probably, I don't know if he's Republican or Democrat, but, as everybody knows, he's announced he's pulling a lot of his support from Columbia because of what's going on up there. And he made a comment that I really appreciated, and it made me really think a lot. And he said, universities used to be a place where kids went to learn how to think and how to critically think, not where they're told what to think. So I think a lot of it boils back to the leadership of those institutions and what are you really trying to accomplish with your students? And what you're trying to accomplish as a leader, whether you agree or not or like it or not, filters down into the education process to the students. So when the students feel like they can have the leadership that will support, they can do anything and anything they want, under the guise of the First Amendment. There's a reason we can't yell fire in a theater, right? And that's the old cliche that everyone uses, but there's a reason for those types of guardrails. So I hope we can get back as America to a place where schools are an institution to learn how to critically think and apply those skills to life in whatever you do, in whatever line of work or whatever you decide to do with your future. But it's at a really unusual point right now that I did not anticipate seeing in my lifetime, but we're there and we have to deal with it. But I would support the leaders of the schools kind of getting back to that kind of overlying principle.
Great question. I can't imagine being a Jewish professor and being blocked from my classroom in Columbia. I can't imagine being a student or whose parents pay $100,000 a year and have to do online classes now. That just shows a lack of leadership, a lack of fortitude from government, all levels, all the way down. And I would just say generally that I think Florida has done a good job to balance appropriate legislation with your First Amendment constitutional rights. And I mentioned the Second Amendment. Look, that has limitations. First Amendment has limitations. And it's important that we recognize that. And it's sad. It's very sad for me to see some of these fine universities turn in to situations like this. And it's not going to happen in Florida. It cannot happen in Florida. And if we need to do anything differently because it does happen in Florida, I'll be the first one to sign up for legislation to the extent that would be helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Please give our representatives and our senator a round of applause. Again, Senator Jim Boyd, Representative Tommy Gregory, Representative Will Robinson. Tommy, Mr. President, I'm so proud. Listen, I want to thank all of you for coming today. I'm going to go over my program. If you're one of the board members, would you please stand and just wave your hand and be recognized really quick? Thank you for all your service today. I appreciate you. Prodigal's daughters and Kaylee's back in the back. I'm going to tell you, we have 2 meetings in May. We're about to go into legislation and our election debates. May 16, 2024, we have the former Chief of Staff for the Manatee Supervisor of Elections, Scott Farrington, and the Sarasota County Supervisor of Elections, Ron Turner. I am aware there is a new Supervisor of Elections, so they will be invited to actually sit on the panel also for the 2024 vote. May 30th is how AI and changing workforce will impact the future economy. And also, June and July, we will have our commissioners, our reps, and our school board debates. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you, Charles Clapsaddle and METV for coming out today, and everyone who came out to join us, and thank you for your patience. Have a great day.
Thank you.